You're listening to a podcast called About Buildings and Cities. I'm Luke Jones.
I'm George Gingell.
And we're deep into the oeuvre of John Soane, one of the great English London architects, the great figure of his generation. There's a lot of other... We've done a lot of the great, big, monumental works, the great works. We still got the house to do, obviously. But then there's a lot of other bits that don't really fit in anywhere, and I feel like they to some extent kind of orbit around the question of the city, the idea of the kind of the city, the civic building, and the proper character of building in this new thing which is a bit like a modern metropolis, this kind of rapidly expanding City of London. We've got a whole kind of grab bag of different interesting ones. This also contains some of what for me are some of the real interesting discoveries of this project, things which I'd absolutely never heard of before, and where there are some really strange and interesting bits of design going on in his engagement with the site and brief.
As we had with the Bank of England, there's the beginning of the big building that's not a palace, the urban building.
Yeah.
So until in history, in a way, the urban building is a townhouse, as we saw with Palladio. You know, an urban churches are mostly kind of iterations of every other sort of church. And then there would be a couple of civic buildings in the centre. But now we're beginning to get a society where you have the beginning of big buildings. You know how you walk around the centre of a city now and it's like, oh, there's another big building.
It's full of them. Yeah.
It's full of
big buildings.
It's full of offices and flats and things.
Yeah.
That's what the big building is full of.
Yes.
So there's the beginning of that.
Institutions.
But also, I mean, what we've got in front of us is a big building which is...
Houses.
They hadn't quite worked out how to make it into yuppie flats, but it's kind of... that's a big mixed-use commercial development.
Yeah. So around 1807, the bank decided to do a little bit of what's essentially kind of speculative development. There was a site on the other side of the road from Tivoli Corner, the northwestern corner of the bank. They acquired it and they wanted to develop it as a set of 5 fairly large houses. Although houses in this case, they're kind of also businesses. So I guess people would have lived there, but they're also the place where you would carry on business as someone working in...
Financial services.
Yeah, all kinds of...
Financial and professional services. What a surprise.
They kind of take shape over about 4 years. I think they're built in the kind of early 1810s. And there's an awful lot of this going on in the Georgian city, obviously. It's something which you associate with the really Georgian bits of London, like Bloomsbury, or, you know, they're building all of these big squares. There's a kind of a type, which is that the houses are, or I guess like Regent's Park.
The Nash terraces and those things, they feel like a cliche of Georgian London.
Yeah.
Something we well understand. This feels like a proto-city building.
Yeah.
It feels very different. It doesn't look... You can see it shares DNA with a Nash terrace or a square, but it has some significant differences. There are stylistic differences, but then also it feels like it's not a whole block, but it's a block building.
Yeah. Well, it changes it a lot that it's in the existing city of London, and so the sort of geometry of the site is much more kind of complicated. It's going around a corner, and it's kind of slightly irregular corner, and that's something which Soane has to make something of. The Georgian London we kind of associate more with these new planned squares and kind of urban districts. I guess what it shares with them is they tend to be quite abstract, like they're quite abstract, kind of blocky, and they do have some classical detailing, you know, more maybe in the Nash terraces and a bit less in the kind of Bloomsbury type terraces, but it's quite sparing.
They're in fact very austere.
Yeah.
By and large, not all of them, made of fairly austere materials to make money.
Yes.
But they've got to be prestigious.
Yes.
It was successful property development. It's all about creating desirable goods out of not very much, rather than what is the minimum we need for this to become super luxury?
Yeah, there's a development of 5 houses, and the Georgian house typology, you mean like extremely familiar, either 1 or 2 rooms at the front, same at the back, a staircase top lit somewhere in the middle, and then sometimes a kind of extension which would be on one side or the other. And in this case they
tall,
lots
of floors,
tall, regular,
but probably
grid
only
windows.
Probably only 2.5 floors of luxurious inhabitation, and the rest is sort of service.
Yeah. And in this case, they build quite a lot round the back, and there's a kind of big single-story annex to each of these around the back. I guess in a more kind of conventional
It was the
luxury.
Mews.
Yeah, you have your mews, you'd have your coach house or whatever round
And what's
the
the
back.
financial services equivalent of a coach and horses? Clerks.
Clerks to deal. Yeah, they have what they call counting houses, which I guess are quite strongly built, top-lit, single-story offices for dealing in cash and valuable goods.
paper.
Yeah. It's quite a nice plan. He obviously has to kind of deal with this slightly awkward geometry, and then he also wants to characterise the houses a little bit differently in each case. And one of the ways that he does that is with the staircase. The staircase, I guess, as so often in a building, is the freest element. It can be like a triangle. It can be a sort of pill shape. I don't know even what that is, a kind of irregular pentagon thing.
Well, the key thing there is it's the actual rise is taken up in a slow arc.
Yeah.
Which goes most of the way around an irregular shape.
They make it look very easy, light, very easy.
These are some of the best sort of plans. I mean, they've been doing them for a long time, where you have a weird-shaped urban site and you fit. The Georgian squares have a strict order and grandeur, which is appealing.
Yeah.
And they go well with trees. But there's not that much architecture. Whereas this is like, that's a plan you can put on a T-shirt.
Yeah, baby.
It's gorgeous. It's full of the resolution. The thing that's very interesting to resolve is you need large, prestigious rooms, which are orthogonal, because this is a prestigious development.
Yeah.
And you've got a very irregular site. And that means you've got lots of funny shapes in between them, and you can make that work if you're good at it. And that's something that Soane was very good at.
Yeah, no, it's nice.
Have we discussed the facade at all? The front facade before we go back to the back. Is that actually what they built?
Oh, God. I mean...
Because there's quite a big difference between that and
I think,
that. Well, let's say this feels a bit like a mutation of Soane with Georgian block.
Yeah.
It feels more like one building. So the squares would make some effort to be a bit like one building. Often the centre of one of the sides will have a
kind of a sort of stress, as if it's a central
or some
pavilion or something.
Decoration on the facade. But this is more so like that. It's
Yeah.
got a little mini pseudo temple thing on the top.
Yeah.
It's got round-topped windows on the ground floor, which actually, I don't know how much chicken and egg there is with round-top windows, stock brick with cement or Portland stone detailing and amber glass. There are a lot of not Soane buildings from this period that have all of those things.
Yeah.
If you go around here, there's lots of amber glass round. I don't know if that's his influence or that was just what was fashionable.
Yeah, I don't know.
But there's a lot of that. And then on the top, there are the tall, oblong windows and a bit more decoration than you would expect. And also the you kind of go up some stairs into the main floor, and it's a bit elevated, and you can still have a lot of stuff at the bottom. So those are pretty standard features. But the way it takes around the corner is a bit unusual as well. And the other side, it's all round top windows, according to this.
I do read, so on the Soane collection, they have these little essays where if you read all the way through it, you can normally identify which of the drawings is closest to the final scheme as constructed. And I do try to do that, but I think I might get it wrong sometimes. So I'm not vouching for any of these necessarily being the most perfect ones.
And the detailing on the top also it's definitely making some nods, I would say, to the Bank of England, which is very much adjoining.
Yeah.
So if you look at the corner
over the
image,
road.
You can see we've got some of this sort of, I don't know what you call those, like
It's kind of balustrade sort of big stone balustrade thing. Yeah.
But also with the
that little tomb motif thing.
Flower
Yeah.
motif thing that I expect Matt.
And there's a nice watercolor of the two of them together, which very much like plays up the repetition.
Isn't there a problem with this watercolor? They've done a special trick of removing the enormous thing that would block the view in the foreground.
Oh well, yeah. Probably, almost certainly. Yeah. I mean, we'll see that more in a second with the building we're going to talk about next, where I think the counting houses. This
is cool, isn't it?
It's very cool. So there's a watercolor of what it says is the entrance to some of the counting houses around the back, which is this amazing image of sort of looks like a sort of group of family tombs in a kind of idealized kind of cemetery or something. It's quite sort of
They would
powerful.
be able to make money from that as a filming location if it still existed,
Yeah.
or ever existed. It feels a bit doubtful to me that in a spec building project that could survive value engineering.
I mean, so they're these very sort of powerful, very orthogonal, very stark, and they've got again the corners of each of the facades have got these sort of little stressed sort of tombey things. It reminds me again of like Lutyens or something like that. It's got that kind of stripped back classicism.
It's slightly like the little bits of Liverpool Cathedral
Yeah.
that exist. I mean, obviously, the actual language is quite different.
Yeah.
But it's also a lot of language with not very much. A sort of triumphal arch opening,
Yeah.
niches, boxes on top of the niches with sculpture, little tombs on top of them, or are they kind of eared altars with
Yeah.
frills on them? And then the same thing kind of wrapped all around in what looks like Portland stone.
Yeah. It's, I mean,
Bit fancy for the back
for
bit.
this it's this tiny little yard around the back, and I think one of these doors even actually just goes through the party wall into someone else's warehouse or whatever. But very cool, yeah, very cool little set of houses, and I think they struggled to let them because they had to charge so much money for them, but they managed to do it in the end.
You hear that story about prestigious central urban developments all the time,
Yeah.
then and now,
Yes.
and it doesn't mean they don't make loads of money.
Yes. The particular plan that we're looking at also has this kind of shaded site which is out to the back of the houses, which is another bit that the bank
I mean,
owned.
we should have said there's a whole load of lovely, more construction drawings that show you the nice interiors you get with these sculptural shaped rooms.
Oh, yeah.
Often with half-built floors and light coming through them, and
Yeah.
the different beautiful light wells and things, which are the sorts of stuff that we covered in a way in the country house
Yeah.
episode, although at a diminished scale.
Yeah. So yeah, they also owned this site which was immediately to the rear of the houses, which became the site for something called the National Debt Redemption Office, which I think they were sort of starting to build a tiny bit after this, but in the 1810s again, I think. And this is sort of technically associated with the Bank of England because it's to do with the national debt, but its purpose is the opposite. It's to pay off the debt rather than to sell it to investors. This is a scheme which originates with, it's William Pitt, and then there's a guy I think called Richard Price, who was a contemporary kind of polymath economist, scientist crank of the kind that I think people tended to be in those days. But as I understand it, they had this clever scheme. Obviously, it caused a bit of anxiety that the state was borrowing so much money, especially for the kind of strain of good and sober government. They have this scheme that the way they're going to pay off the national debt is...
The good and sober way.
Yeah, the good and sober way is that they're going to put a little bit of money aside continuously, and then they're going to make compound interest work for them so that the government's money will grow faster than the national debt, and then they'll pay it all off in one go. I may have misunderstood this, but essentially it's
Seems a little fanciful.
it's a little bit reminiscent.
There's that estate, isn't there, that was left in like 1910 or something, that was £100,000, which was left with the instruction that it should be used when it could be used to pay off the national debt in full.
Yeah.
It's now worth a fair amount of money.
It is a bit like that.
In any case, they needed a building.
Yeah, so they did. Like, I mean, as with everything, like government policy, there's a certain sort of literalism to like policy in those days, where it's like, oh, we're going to have a 3% yielding bond, and then you need to have the 3% yielding bond office, and that's like, there's the policy. There's a room where it happens, which kind of contains the entirety of the functioning of that policy. And then people come and see you in that room and get their money. Nowadays, if you were
Well, there
going
wasn't any methods of communication.
Yeah.
The method of communication was someone could walk there.
Nowadays the things are very intermediated.
Yes,
if you
but
put
if the only-
£5 on the council tax, it kind of goes through various sort of
intermediation
algorithms.
that
Yeah.
you can have is, well, someone could take a piece of paper from here to there.
Yeah.
You might as well just have it all going on there anyway.
Yeah, so if you're going to do national debt redemption, you need the National Debt Redemption Building, and that all of the people who administer it are in that building, and all of the records are in that building.
But also,
And
like,
people
I'm
who-
not going to give up my office for this.
Yeah.
So what are they actually doing in this building with this scheme that you have outlined?
Well, I don't really understand what they were doing. They have a few offices. I'm not sure they needed all that much space. I think that...
Clearly not, because it's not a huge building.
Yeah.
But also, a lot of it is not devoted to
Office.
conventionally useful space. Although
Yeah.
very architecturally useful.
I don't really understand how the day-to-day of the National Debt Redemption Scheme actually worked. And I think it might have changed a bit quite quickly from how it was originally planned. Also, it's quite possible I've completely misunderstood.
Yes, I haven't looked into the schematic functioning of this institution at all.
But it's interesting because it's quite a small site, certainly in comparison with the houses and certainly with the bank. But it nevertheless goes through an awful lot of design development, and Soane...
There's a real addiction to versioning here.
Yeah, versioning, optioneering. It's clear that there's a kind of gradual value engineering squeeze at the level of materials going on, but otherwise, really, the activity seems to be sort of self-driven. He's really kind of interrogating how can he make this particular sort of formal problem on this particular site work.
It's that 6-day-a-week, 14-hour work days. He's got all his
Yeah, well, I mean, he was in there on Sundays. So the site is on a street called Old Jewry, which is kind of semi-parallel to the side of the Bank of England. It's kind of one street over and slightly converging, which is a fairly narrow street, as most of the non-thoroughfares in the city are. And then it's a corner site. It's also got a side on this little kind of passageway, which I think no longer exists. I think that all of this has been swallowed by much larger buildings now, although I think the Grocers Hall, which is behind it, may still be there in some sort of form. But yeah, so it's got a principal facade and a side facade, and then it's got a connection to a building on its left. He's really trying to resolve those things, like the connection to the existing building next to it, how to do that, how to do the corner, and how to do the relationship between these two facades, one of which feels like it needs to be bigger and more important.
Well, one of which is on a really very narrow passageway.
Yeah.
I mean, if we go back to the plan, the principal facade is visible because it's quite near the corner.
Yeah.
But it's still on a fairly narrow street.
Yeah.
And then the minor facade is on a snicket. It's on a street that's not, perhaps you couldn't touch both sides of it at the same time, but
yeah, not far off.
But two people together certainly could, and it's very narrow. So we've got, the thing one I remember from this is in one of the Palladio episodes we had the sort of facade, quite a lot of discussion of the sort of facade that looks good when you're looking at it at a very oblique angle.
Yeah. What's odd about, I'm not sure, the way that he illustrates the project doesn't make it seem like he's really thinking about the perceptual qualities of this facade so much. It almost seems like he's considering it as if it were on a very wide street.
I don't know. I mean, it's got a lot of... One thing you do when you have a facade that's going to be dealt with on an oblique angle is that you can have very shallow relief in the massing.
Yeah.
So you can move some bits back a little bit and that has a much more significant effect than it would if it was viewed dead on. And it strikes me there's a bit of that going on.
Perhaps it's just that the way... So there's a whole series of these perspectives, which I think are impossible perspectives.
Definitely, yes.
Of the front of it, which read as if they're looking across a much wider
I think
street
that
than
road would have had something. It may also be that the perspective is impossibly wide. It's a bit difficult to tell without anything that becomes distorted particularly.
On the front facade, he does, I guess, you're right. I mean, on the front facade, he's constantly... he always has at least sort of two different layers going on, and sometimes three or four.
I would say that one's got three.
Yeah. The outer boundary of the site against the street, things which are sort of inset to different degrees, and in a lot of the schemes, he kind of makes the corners concave, so that they're kind of inset, which also makes the mass of the building sort of stand a little bit proud from the one next to it, because it's got this kind of shadow gap between the two of them, creating these kind of like semi-loggia feeling elements.
In the one that we're looking at, and there are various iterations of this, there are often paired kind of towers, which are either right at the corners, or in this case, kind of a quarter of the way in.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, they don't come up above the level of the building, but they protrude out from the facade.
Yeah.
And then this has got a sort of stepping form where the ground floor steps out fully, and then that narrows in a bit. That would be a lot more dramatic when viewed from any of the places you could actually look at it from.
Yeah.
than it appears in these drawings. That's a bit difficult for me to test
Yeah.
because it doesn't exist anymore.
Feels very Swiss for some reason, like
Yes,
contemporary.
it's got
Contemporary kind of Swiss German vibe.
It's going between the geometric and the highly abstracted classical.
Yeah.
So there's some classical detailing. The rustication is just horizontal lines cut in, as we had with the Tyringham gatehouse.
Yeah.
But here, just because it's bars of sort of stripes, it's perhaps even more, in a way, abstract. And I think that edge does feel quite Middle Europe.
There's basically a series of, I think there are 9, and then I think there might be another 5 or 7 of which are all the same perspective, watercolour, doing different versions of it, which are a really great little set of design exercises to look through. And he's varying sometimes the number of the bays, the way in which they're kind of stressed. This is quite an enjoyable one where it's much more sort of pushed out, and then you have a sense on the second floor of almost like a little pavilion standing on top of a big podium or something like that. It's a little temple motif.
And again, it's his strange Greek revival.
Yeah.
But which is a Greek revival like no one else, which is very abstract.
Yeah.
And very minimal.
There's real weird stuff going on with the symmetry. So they've got these 2 little boxes with a round window and a door below. But that one is a real door and that one's a fake door, and you actually go in the side.
Yeah, which is strange. It also protrudes out onto this very narrow street, making a real pinch point.
Yeah.
And then the round windows, which are on a surface with no decoration at all, while the circle on a surface with no decoration is something Palladio did, they do look curious.
Yeah.
It's not quite in the same language as everything else. And in this proposal, there's a semi-basement floor also that's got... So you've got kind of bits of the tops of windows poking out of the ground.
Yeah, the like centre bay, what feels like the most important opening, is actually like a death hole into the basement.
Yeah.
With the kind of top of an arch poking through.
It's got sort of 5 bays and 4 doors, which is a lot of doors.
Yeah, that's the plan. It's a weird one. The plan goes through a lot of configurations.
Why do they have both those doors? They go to the same corridor.
I don't know. Yeah, this one is not very convincing as a plan.
I mean, some of these schemes are now becoming much more just like...
Super pragmatic.
Super pragmatic. The only thing is that all the windows have got round tops.
Yeah. And then...
I mean, that one is almost boring.
That one looks like a Methodist chapel or something, doesn't it? With this kind of lower level thing. Yeah, I think...
The plans start to get much more resolved and better and more interesting, though.
Yeah.
And the section is great.
Yeah. So at a certain point, there is a bit of a curveball, which is that they decide that it's going to have in the middle of it a mausoleum to William Pitt to commemorate the founder of this great scheme to pay off the national debt. And
the second William Pitt mausoleum that Soane has been involved with.
Oh, yeah, he did one for the father as well.
Yeah.
That's nice. Yeah, that's nice. So that becomes basically the centre of the plan, where I guess you would have had this kind of light well hall of some kind anyway, normally. That now becomes this sort of quasi sort of religious shrine element. Wonder if we've got...
Shrine of a rather pagan character, I would say.
Yeah. Looking at the section, is like half of the section is this thing. It's got its own quite grand sort of lantern and low level first floor or ground floor, upper ground floor, kind of shrine space.
The accommodation of the building, there's a semi-basement, which is just all service stuff, although it's got some quite fun... It's kind of quite cryptic. And then the rest of the accommodation is in a U around a square light well.
Yeah.
And in the square light well is a little temple with a round pillared dome, which lights a kind of central space with the cult statue at the back.
Yeah.
The seated pit.
Yeah.
In classical garb. And that is the circulating centre. But I think in front of him is a light well which goes down into the service...
God,
or is it not? Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't.
I'm trying to figure out I haven't been able to...
Which one did they do?
Which one did they actually build? Yeah.
So we're looking at a painting, a watercolour of an arch, round top arch, looking into this sort of temple.
Yeah.
with William Pitt at the back. But the space that we're standing in is the office reception room.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun.
It's weird, though, isn't it?
It's very weird.
It's
yes.
weird, yeah. So this is why did this sort of make sense? Like, this is this fusion of like...
Well, where else would I going to put it?
Yeah, I guess. So this is a kind of institutional building, but it's also it's a mausoleum. Fine.
Have you ever thought that in institutional and government work, when a project is going through, people will occasionally tack their hobby horses to it as a way of getting things through?
I guess maybe,
I can only assume that was part of this. Okay, we've got this... Someone's done this statue already.
Yeah.
We've got to put it in. He's died tragically and young.
Yeah.
I can't think of any other reason than that.
Yeah. It's a very peculiar fusion, very much of its era.
But it leads to a really exciting bit of sectional space, that thing. Because this sort of temple light well in the middle of an office building, which is very set up to... both it illuminates the core of the building, but it also illuminates the sculpture of William Pitt.
Yeah.
And it cordons off the middle of the building like a cloister. There's a sort of brightly lit space devoted to the former Prime Minister.
Yeah. So, yeah, the final one that they build... So I think this is the final scheme. Essentially, he gets a kind of compromise where he does have this half bay kind of concavity at the corners, but only on the first and second floors. And at the ground floor, it sort of fully fills out the site to the corners. Yeah, there is a tiny bit of this kind of very abstract stone rustication dressing on the ground floor, but it's mostly stucco.
And he put in a funny arcade. He's always wanting to put these arcades in.
Yeah.
Which are arcades between quite thick piers with round top arches. They go in a lot of schemes and very rarely get built, but here's one that he's actually got in. It's a fruity project. It's difficult to describe.
It is hard to describe, isn't it? I guess what immediately grabbed me like when I saw it is, it does feel oddly contemporary. Very geometric, very abstract, very urban, but also like sort of slightly classicist and alluding to history in these quite sophisticated and quite kind of non-obvious ways. It feels very contemporary to me. It feels like there are a lot of European architects who are doing this kind of thing at the moment. It's a sort of flavour of early 21st century Middle European style in a way.
It also is convincingly odd. I mean, in the images of it, this kind of... a lot of these projects actually have real grids and serried ranks of round-topped windows or openings, which he likes to have painted in as if they were completely unglazed black, just looking into a dark void. And that gives the buildings a really strange, powerfully kind of gritty, but also kind of dead-eyed...
Yes.
Look, and
he's ahead of his time, isn't he?
Geometry.
Yeah.
It's got an air of the uncanny.
Yeah.
As well as the historical nods are almost all sepulchral.
Well, I think in those days they might have painted the sashes a dark colour rather than a light colour as well. Yeah. Which would have made them read more like that.
I think that does give them a nice crisp.
Yeah.
It doesn't work so well when all the buildings are actually black already.
Yes.
They were never intended to be black. That's just...
the environment.
The environment did that to them.
Oh yeah, there's this like fun little curiosity I found as well, where he's done like two different options of sort of finial type ornamentations on top, but it's quite fun to imagine it being taken literally.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. One's a little moustache and one's like a little kind of stupa. It'd be quite cute to have one of each.
I think they went for neither, please.
Yeah. So the Chelsea Barracks.
There's bits of this one still there.
Yes.
Although not very much.
Yeah, so there's a kind of overall perspective of the various things he built at Chelsea, which were quite extensive at the time, but significantly demolished and also some of them blown up in the war. The main bit which survives is the stables. But yeah...
I think some of the stables.
Yeah. Yeah, he built the infirmary. He also built lots of little... Was it principally like almshouses? What manner of barracks was it? I'm a bit confused.
Chelsea pensioners.
Right, yeah. So who are they then?
It's like Les Invalides. It's the people the guys in red coats.
Okay.
So if you served in, you can still do this to today,
Yeah.
although there's a bit of a waiting list. If you've been in the armed forces for a long period,
Yes.
I think you have to serve for like 25 years or something, you can swap your military pension for living as a Chelsea pensioner, and you wear a red woolen coat. Now you have cubicles. They used to have them in sort of dormitories, and they look after you. And it's a big old complex up on the hill in Chelsea, and then this bit is further down.
Yeah.
And yeah, it has the infirmary, it has a house of an overseer, and it has a stable block.
Yeah.
And a sort of grand entrance.
It's all very bricky, this one. Like, some of it's quite sort of expressive and a bit reminiscent of, I don't know, like Ledoux or whatever. These kind of sort of strange, slightly grotesque little neoclassical sort of houses and things. And then a lot of it is essentially Soane's version of super pragmatist architecture, like boxes, very bricky arches.
But he's really enjoying the geometry as well.
Yeah.
The boxes are very boxy. The arches are much more expressed than...
Yeah.
The only thing he's got to play with is he can do some decoration in brick if you don't have to make any special bricks. And he does that by having blind arches all over the place, or, ones that are just sunk in by a bat.
Yeah. So the infirmary is this sort of big building with two wings, lots of round arched,
very tall, thin, round arched grid, which can be an arcade, windows, doors, blind.
And then the various little houses and things with sort of some blind arches, some real windows, some peculiar little I forget who this one is for, these like peculiar tiny little houses with very overspecified chimneys. Yeah, and then the stables, which are the bit which there's still quite a lot to look at of, which have these extraordinarily large kind of expressed blind arches with little real arched doorways and openings in the middle.
There's a opening which is a door and a window above it, door with a light, creating this sort of false perspective set of arches going into the facade, but which are very large and take up 2/3 of this really cuboidal, oblong block. With it's very striking. I think I can't think of many things from the period that are like it. Comparing it to the much more pedestrian bit just up there, it looks a lot more exciting, but with very humble materials.
Yeah. And then there's the stables have a kind of yard, as you would expect, on four sides. And then round the back, it's also got this play of all sorts of different arches of different sizes.
These are cool, aren't they?
Yeah, they are cool. Yeah, this one is very again, it's like super geometric. It's like the National Debt Redemption Office. There's a lot of enjoyment of this playing around with these big primary geometries and the openings in them.
What are these? What is this strange succession of doors and windows and blind things? And it's a funny lot. So if you imagine the building as being two cubes with a sort of bridge between them, and then the top of the first floor of the cube is three windows, perhaps 2.5 times their width of the height, with a round top, and then underneath that it's a really big one, which is partially filled in, a really small one hanging high, with a tiny lunette very low, and then a completely glazed reflection of the first one. Strange combination, just sort of starkly presented. Fun.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's compositional, isn't it? It's real.
This is real formal play. I can't think of anyone else doing this until fruity modernism.
Well, yeah, that's it. You can see why people kind of get back into him a bit in the era of modern architecture, because he's having a lot of fun with pretty abstract geometry. It's interesting that this definitely feels like one of his modes is pure brick, simple geometry. And
it's funny though, because as soon as he's allowed to by budget, he'll cover it in crap.
Yeah. No, yeah. He doesn't think this is how cities should be, but if he's forced to, he will
If he's forced to, he'll do something brilliant. If he's allowed to, he will absolutely encase it in gubbins. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very funny, yeah. Gosh, it's very bricky. It really makes the bricks look good in their element, aren't they?
It's coming from nowhere as well. I can't think of... So, the period was quite stark and geometric, as we've said before.
Yeah.
Or could be.
Standard Georgian housing is very bricky and very simple. But,
and there was an emphasis in the aesthetics of the time on the elegant and the simple.
Yeah.
But this is...
Well, yeah, there's
very different.
It feels like an evocation of stuff that doesn't exist yet, like kind of railway arches and...
but as you said, it's a long... I mean... It's just not that long, I suppose.
Yeah.
But it hasn't happened yet.
It's a sort of homage to a industrial future that doesn't exist yet. Or
this is the Napoleonic era.
Yeah.
It's just finished. You know, it feels far more modern.
Yeah.
Far more modern. It would be hard to date, but you wouldn't date it to... When's this? 18...
this is in the 18 teens 18 teens again, I think. Yeah. Fascinating. There's also a great set. I mean, this is true for various projects, but there's a particularly fun set of construction watercolours for this one, with lots of. There's an amazingly dangerous looking ladder in
great.
in that picture.
Carrying a hod up that. Also resting on like a joist.
Yeah.
Look at those openings.
Yeah.
At the back. They're so tall and thin.
God, yeah.
Really cool. Yeah. It's very daring. It's like.
Yeah. Blimey, yeah, I wouldn't fancy that. Yeah, and some interesting sort of scaffolding and things going on. There's one of the infirmary going up with a bit of scaffolding.
There's not a lot of bracing on that scaffolding, is there?
No, you wouldn't want to be on it in any kind of wind, really. I think as a point of comparison, so he did...
What's this? We just shingle now?
Yeah. So this is like much... This is... in the late 1820s, he published one of his more widely disseminated books, because he published quite a lot of books where he published one copy and that copy is in the museum. Some of them he published like 30 copies to give away to friends and then didn't give any of them away and instead destroyed them all, or that kind of thing. But this one was actually quite widely distributed. It's his designs for kind of public buildings. He proposes a whole series of interventions into the kind of public spaces of London to create a kind of monumental order, very much influenced both by contemporary Paris and then also by the French architecture, which he really likes, which actually is not really contemporary, but from the kind of 1750s to 70s.
It's what was cool
when he was young.
When he was young,
yeah.
Except that he puts all this funny Greek stuff on it.
Yeah.
But it's Greek revival that no one else does.
Yeah.
It normally involves a lot of tombs on the roof.
So this is like a big kind of classic triumphal arch with an enormous equestrian statue on top.
I mean, the reproductions, these are presumably... They might even be steel engravings by this point.
Yeah.
But it's very fine, like the very fine ruling pen perspectives you get in the Schinkel books, which is what I was thinking of.
Yeah. They're
very reminiscent.
Well, yeah, sort of semi-contemporary with and very reminiscent of this kind of ligne claire style that you get in Schinkel, and you also get in people like Flaxman as well. You know, these sort of nice crisp black lines on a white ground. But yeah, it's interesting. I thought there's an interesting bit of context. So he did own this book in the 1750s. This guy he's called John Gwynne, had done a book all about improving London. And Gwynne was a much less well put together kind of architect, slightly mad. But he had published this big book all about all of the things that could be done to make London work better. A lot of which are about what we would now think of as kind of traffic improvements.
Yeah.
Like, these streets don't connect properly, but they should connect properly. Or they're all like long bits about how Lord so-and-so's garden is blocking the way between these two streets, and we should put a little hole through there and change the angle of this garden wall so that carts can get around. It's quite a weird... I've dipped into it a bit, and it's a strange read. There's a lot of continuity between the sorts of things that he's proposing and the sorts of things which Soane is proposing as well. Notably,
and I think this comes in a long line of
Yeah.
improvements, which is the city is irregular,
Yeah.
hard to get around, and not monumental.
And what it needs is, to make the streets line up better. And it needs some proper big, grand, monumental spaces like the French have. Gwynne here proposes an absolutely enormous palace in the middle of what I think is... What is that? Is that Green Park? Well, it's not really any park, is it? It's
it's the land as yet undeveloped.
that would have been
to the west of the city.
Yeah, this is very like Versailles by numbers, isn't it? It's like mega palace with radiating paths going out in every direction.
It's not very good though.
No,
Even the very minimal information we've got here looks weak.
yeah, and
It
various
looks
other
weak
bits.
source. I don't think it would work.
It's he's definitely a crank, but it's quite an entertaining read. I mean, the other thing which I thought was interesting is that he also thought that he had a kind of suggestion for the Bank of England, which was that it should be regularised into a big kind of square courtyard.
Sort of like a mini Place de Vosges,
Yeah,
but it's not big enough for that.
no, this is long before. I guess this is even before they'd built the first set of banking halls. Yeah, so when it was really quite a small site at that point.
Really twiddly, neoclassical nothings, pavilions, frou-frou. It's funny how much effort he seems to put into this.
Yeah, it's definitely what's one of the peculiarities about Soane is if we think about the things about him which we find exciting, his interiors are extremely exciting, his domes and all of their various kinds are extremely exciting, domes and cupolas, his use of brick and the kind of expressiveness of these really simple, stark brick volumes are really exciting.
Geometric massing. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas what he thought what he wanted to be his great contributions to London were to kind of Corinthianize everything in this extremely bland French style.
Bland and weird.
Yeah.
Like, why do you not go through... He's always being really perverse. As we had right at the beginning with the bridge...
Yeah.
It's got the masses in kind of weird places. They're not at the beginning of the bridge. They're at like a quarter of the way down.
Yeah.
They're really strange. Here, you don't go through the triumphal arches.
There's a gap between them in the middle.
There's a gap between them. There's 4 triumphal arches. And you go through the gaps between them, more or less. And why did you have 4 triumphal arches? 2 next to each other, and then 2 sort of 45 degrees... canted out from that.
It's
and
weird,
the
isn't
arches
it?
themselves are sort of strange mixture of styles. It's got that kind of weird, Plechnik in Ljubljana. He's like the last diehard classicist in a way, but all his stuff is weird.
Yeah.
Like all of the classical proportions are sort of strange, and it's like that. It's weird, classical, OTT, but there's also nothing there.
Yeah.
It doesn't make an entrance.
When he really dreamed about an architecture with no constraints of budget or site, this is what he wanted to do, where these, sort of super mega scale stone Corinthian things. It's a weird one. Yeah, so there's a proposal for a mega palace, which I guess... Where is this? This is St. James's Park. A guy kind of 3-sided... thing structured.
It's got a sort of hippodrome in the middle. It's kind of funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, that's the bit the chariots go around, right?
Yeah.
So no one has ever built a palace like this. There are ways. At first, you look at it and you think, this can't possibly... This doesn't seem like Soane. What is this? And then there are ways that it's like Soane. It's eccentrically antique, like the ruins of Rome. It's got these kind of broken sets of... kind of freestanding columns and things which feel like they're part of ruins. It's a palace with a huge yard in front, a court, but the court is done up like a hippodrome with sort of twin obelisks down the middle.
Yeah, Ben-Hur.
Ben-Hurish, yeah. I think all of the windows have round tops, but sort of detailing on top of them. There's a big dodgy pediment at the end, but then there's a very tall dome with columns at the sort of centre point.
Yes, that would be a big light well of some kind. There isn't that much sign of these kind of light well spaces, though. There's a kind of vague suggestion of them.
Yeah. This, Okay, this isn't good.
It doesn't look great, does it?
This isn't good. It's not good architecture.
No. But it is quite, yeah. No, I don't
It's
think
all also weirdly single story. I mean, not quite, but
yeah. Quite Beaux-Artsy though, isn't it? Symmetrical.
yeah, sure.
Symmetrical courtyards.
It's the most interesting thing you can say about a project is it's symmetrical.
Yeah.
Slightly on weak ground, I would say.
Yeah, no, I don't think this is a good one. This is one we've already talked about, the entrance to Downing Street, but it's kind of reproduced in a new form.
But
with,
this is souped. Is that really it?
Oh, right, so this would have been the other end from the one that we were talking about. So this would have been a second entrance coming from the St James's Park side into Downing Street. It's all...
What was he thinking?
It's all this kind of empty grandeur, isn't it?
But it's energyless as well.
Yeah. And it's everything is the same. There is like it's one note for the entire kind of monumental identity of the city.
Weird.
Yeah, and then
this is like
this
all
is
we're
the
going
one.
to do is
This is the one we
super
talked
duper
about.
duper duper dup.
Yeah.
Whitehall end.
Yeah. So another triumphal arch here. That's attached columns on the outside. So I guess there's a slight difference.
Do you think he's like talking to an audience that really likes this stuff, or do you think this is just what he thinks is good? Because there's a real mismatch to me between the extreme proficiency of the drawings, which look very definite because of the clear line, and the real ropiness and unthought throughness of the designs that are being presented. The kind of finer the detailing you're going to put into an image, the more definite it becomes, the sort of shoutier the graphical quality is. Like, this is exactly what I'm going to do.
Well, yeah, you ask more questions, the more resolved the design is.
I reckon the trad architecture crowd like this. It's got like lots of stuff, right?
Is this the way that people want the city to look? In one sense, it's also very uniform. Everything, like underneath the Corinthian dressing, everything is a cuboid with a grid of windows. You can vary how tightly packed the Corinthian dressing is. Here you've got like paired columns every so often and this like triumphal arch motif.
I mean, I suppose it would be quite fun, this thing. It would feel sort of strangely postmodern and awkward.
What would happen further up Whitehall? I guess this would just continue.
I mean, have you been around Whitehall?
I mean, it's not great, but it's...
it is kind of like... It's not as twiddly as this, but it is a monotony of Portland stone.
Yeah, I guess that the intent of the book was really to, convince the government to spend a bit of money on making the city properly grand. And I think that this...
doing, like, certainly at Whitehall, they made properly grand kind of at the turn of the century.
I mean, there's more.
This palace is at least really insane.
Yeah.
This is the giant triangular palace that we've had earlier.
Yeah.
There are some elements, twiddly classical elements, that he has in right from the beginning of his career and he never abandons.
Yeah.
Such as the drum with lots of columns around it, sort of thing on top, temple on top of a building.
Yeah.
The big stupa dome. And he also likes doing triangles.
Yeah.
I think the only one he got to build was a sort of little Gothic lodge at Pell Well. Is there anything else that he did in his triangles? And this is a huge triangular palace there's a lot of architectural language. There's a huge stupa in the middle.
So there's a sort of centre stupa. There's a triangular form, and then they're kind of bisected. These three kind of perpendicular wings meet in the middle, so the whole thing is cut into these three irregular quadrangular bits. It's shafts all the way. Yeah.
You get weird neoclassical building, like some Hedwig's in Berlin or something with a huge dome on top, where things feel sort of out of scale or strange.
Yeah.
And this is a smashed together collage of those interconnecting arms of generic that could be like a run of houses, except in addition to shafts everywhere, lots of columns, there's a continuous band of kind of cake decoration statues, which run all the way around like a crenellation, the perimeter of the building. Nice little job for somebody.
It doesn't look like there's an enormous amount of accommodation in the
If you sort of changed it around a bit, it could be a prison.
Yeah. It's not far off, these courtyards.
And if you thicken it up a bit more, it could be something like the Pentagon. This exoticism as well, it feels like things that are slightly taken from different cultures being banged together.
Yeah, into Western classicism.
The triangle's funny as well because it doesn't fit anywhere. I mean, he's put it in...
Again, the corner of one
The
of the
whole of the
parks,
city
isn't it?
seems to have disappeared, and the only thing that remains of it is St Paul's. And
Yeah.
everything else has become shrubs. There's not many places you can naturally put this.
Enormous triangular megastructure. Yeah.
Triangular structure.
Very hard to... Yeah.
As in, it wouldn't be picturesque from many vantage points.
No.
It would take forever to walk around.
Yeah. It doesn't seem to have that much floor area either. Like, the courtyards are very large. There's a lot of corridor, or gallery, as it probably is. And then there's somehow the kind of the pavilions, which are the nodal points, all feel slightly undersized for the scale
See,
of...
it keeps doing that.
yeah.
It's kind of a fun tension in a way. Yeah. I think this must have just not been a very thought through design.
Right, so we record
Right.
ending.
That's enough.
Yeah.
For now.
So
we thought we could do an episode that wasn't
we're
an
gonna
hour
try
and a half to 2 hours long.
Yeah, we're going to do a little break. There'll be another episode along soon with the subsequent ones. Thank you very much for
I
listening.
think we'll have 2 more episodes.
Yeah, we'll have this, and then we'll have something about the house, and then maybe we'll be allowed to do something which isn't John Soane. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Thanks for following us on social media, and thanks to the elect among you for supporting us on Patreon. It's all...
With this also, I think we've whipped through a number of projects.
Yeah.
And we'll be putting the images up on social media. So
Yeah.
that will allow you to understand a little better what's going on.
Yeah.
The Debt Redemption Office and the Spec Houses have got some really lovely graphics produced by his office. And also there's some interesting spaces there. So much more to crib, I think, from that than there is from these mega projects. Although they're quite fun graphically too.
Yeah, very much so.
Thank you very much for listening.
See you on the next one.